Hi, this is historian Maxine Keoghan. Today, I would like to remember those who lost their lives in one of Waterford's worst tragedies of the 20th century, and that was the sinking of the SS Formby in December 1917 and her sister ship, the SS Coninbeg, 2 days later. The owners of the vessel, the Waterford Steamship Company, were responsible for transporting not only passengers but livestock, food and general cargo between the two great port cities of Waterford and Liverpool. The Formby and the Coninbeg were both returning to Waterford when they were torpedoed by a German U-boat that patrolled the Irish Sea. The U-boat, the SM U-62, was one of 329 submarines of the German Navy during World War I. The submarine was commissioned in 1916, and before it ever encountered the Formby and the Coninbeg, it had succeeded in destroying 38 ships from March to December of 1917. This death by stealth meant no warning was given. The ships were suddenly and dramatically ripped through. We can only imagine how panic-stricken those on board must have been. At this time during the Great War, it was not unusual for U-boats to patrol the waters of England and Ireland. In 1904, when the Coninbeg was built, it was the same year that the luxury Cunard liner, the SS Lusitania, was being constructed. The Lusitania was torpedoed on May 7, 1915 off the Cork coast, killing 1,195 people. The sinking of the Lusitania set off a chain of events that eventually led to the United States entering the war. You see, months before the Lusitania was hit, German naval commanders were convinced that British merchants were arming their ships and that both merchants and passenger ships were transporting weapons and supplies from the United States to Europe. As a result, Germany declared the waters surrounding the British Isles a war zone and stopped following international naval prize laws which warned ships of a submarine's presence. This was a break from naval protocol and angered the Allies, but did little to prevent deaths on board ships such as the Formby and the Coninbeg. The sinking of the Formby and the Coninbeg in December 1917 led to the loss of 83 lives, primarily men, who left behind over 400 grieving wives and children in the southeast counties of Waterford, Kilkenny and Wexford. The memorial to those lost sits on the quay in Waterford, and it reads, "There were harrowing scenes on the Waterford quayside as women and children waited in the wet and cold of winter for news of loved ones." It was after Christmas before the sinkings were confirmed. This was the worst disaster to befall Waterford. Very little wreckage from the ships was ever found, and only one body, that of a stewardess from the Formby, was washed ashore. A bottle containing a message which read, "We will never reach the hook," was washed up on the Wexford shore. The signature on the note could not be positively identified as that of any crew member. Now, the significance of this was that had it been identified as that of a crew member, then it could have placed a question mark over a decision to award a war loss pension to the relatives of those who perished. The official who presented the note for possible identification was of the opinion that if the note originated on one of the ships, it might be an indication that the ship was in difficulties and later foundered in the Great Gale. If this was so, the loss could have been deemed to have been an act of God, and war loss pensions would not have been awarded. An inquiry was held on the 23rd of January 1918, and both ships were posted, presumed torpedoed. Despite the inquiry, the relatives had to wait many years before the authorities accepted that the ships had been torpedoed by a U-boat. Following the disaster, Reverend Hackett said Mass in the cathedral for the repose of the souls of the men who had lost their lives. According to Hackett, the sense of despair in the city and county is palpable. Reports tell of women looking worn out, mentally and physically, by the news of the tragedy. Families from practically every ward in Waterford City have lost a breadwinner. Adding to the tragedy was the fact that due to the bad weather, there was no way to telegram the Coninbeg to warn them of the fate of her sister ship, the Formby. A relief fund was established by the Seamen and Firemen's Union, with £1,400 collected to support the dependents of the victims. It must be remembered that income or state supports were not available at this time. The suffering for families was not only the tragedy and the emotional weight of the loss of a loved one, but for many of these families, it also meant the main income provider was lost too. A great number of families in Waterford, and indeed throughout Ireland at this time, suffered great poverty. Families were large in number and with many dependents. On Alphonsus Road, the fathers of 3 families were lost. Among them was a Mr. P. Hennessy, who left behind a widow and 5 children. Other families included the Morrisseys of Parliament Street, whose father was the cook on board one of the vessels. Mrs. Doyle of Doyle Street lost her husband and also her brother, Stephen Whitty, who was on the same vessel as Mr. Doyle. The tragedy of the Doyle family was most acute, as Mrs. Doyle had, only a few months earlier, lost her son in the Great War. The families of those who love a lost one in these tragedies continue to hold the stories of loss and bereavement. Respectfully, we remember your loss. Thank you. This is Maxine Keoghan.